We're going to take a look at how to validate information that's entered into the cells of your grid, how to use a user-defined function to handle the input fields lines for your grid, and also how to use a message box in Business Rules. And to do this, we're going to use the program from the previous tutorial where you learned to create a grid. To create the function to handle the input fields, select these lines in your program. Copy, and just after the end statement in our program, we'll create the function and paste the lines in there. We'll call the function fnReadListView. And the values to input will be spec $, which will become the name of our grid here. Then num of rows, which is the number of rows that were changed, mat row subscripts, and mat new name, mat new email, and mat new update. And then I'm going to add an if statement here, because we only want to do it if there were rows changed, which means if num of rows is not 0. So pull your input field statement into your if, and once again we're going to replace this with spec. End if, and then fn end to end our user-defined function definition. Everything else remains the same. And then back up in our read loop, we're going to call the function, remove the code that we copied into the function, and we'll say fnReadListView, and we'll enter the name of our grid, specifications, which will become the spec $, and then num of rows, mat row subscripts, mat new name, mat new email, and mat new updates, which will be the variables passed into it and used. Next, since fnReadListView detects what rows were changed, we're going to add a for next statement to check if the changed rows are from the update column and if they are consistent with the data that we want to receive of weekly, daily, or instant. For I equals 1 to num of rows, let new update $, of I equal the trim of new update $, of I. The internal function trim will remove any blank leading or trailing spaces from the value of the variable. And next we'll have an if statement to check if the changed variable for update equals one of the ones that we want, or 0. And I'm using the uppercase internal function to make it simpler. So if our trimmed and uppercase value is equal to daily, weekly, or instant, then we do nothing. Else, if we detect a bad one, it'll be at position I, and I'm going to set the bad one variable to the row subscript of I. And end if, and then we'll set each of our variables to the new variable of I. New update, new name, or new email. And then the next I. And then I'm going to add another if statement, because if the bad one, which is a subscript of I, is greater than 1, then we want it to go to a message box. And the message box keyword requires 4 input items. The first one is the message that will be displayed. And then the next is the title, in this case check update entry. and then an option for what buttons you would like displayed, and lastly, an option for which picture you'd like displayed. The message line that we just wrote will display like this, with our title, our message, the information or INF symbol, and the OK button. If we changed our message and used the YN for the buttons, we'd get yes and no buttons, and QST would get a question mark image. And if you're using 2 or more buttons, you should always set your message box line equal to some value or variable so that you can record the F key value of the button they press and move to that part of your program accordingly. Another option is to use the air or stop sign image and the OK and cancel buttons. And of course you can combine any of these to create the message box that you want. Back in our program, and I'm going to change the bad one back to nothing and set the cursor in the same cell so that the user can replace the incorrect entry. Curfield is an internal function that can be used to set the start position on a screen using the field number, in this case 1 since our entire grid counts as the first field, and the attribute, in this case our row number, times 3, so that it falls into the third column of the row with the bad update value. Used without any parameters, Curfield will return the current place of the cursor. And that if statement, and continue through the loop. And I also need to change the do loop, so I'm going to remove this while F key is less than 1010, and in the loop I'm going to make it while the bad one or F key is less than 1010. Next, we're going to add our print field statement into the do loop so that each time we make a change or correct an incorrect update, it will reprint the changes that we make. And we just have print fields, our grid information, and then our 3 matrices. Also, right before our for I equals 1 to num of rows, we're going to set the bad one variable to 0. And don't forget your let. If you were to run the program right now, it would check the update column for correct entries, but only when you hit either the save or quit buttons. In order to make business rules check every time a cell is changed, we'll have to do it in the data line at the top for the attributes relating to the update column. So here at C10, simply add an X. And this will cause BR to jump out of the input field statement and go through the loop whenever something is changed within that column. Next, let's go ahead and run it. So now that we're in the program, if you make a change that isn't valid, you get the message box that we created, and we'll say OK. It'll put me back in the same box, and I'll get a chance to put the correct one in. And still, if I make other changes, it's still going to save those changes when we hit the save button. And run it again, you can see the changes in my update column. Thanks for joining us today. That's all for now.